It began with nothing more than a simple curiosity. I had heard of the place for years, a towering building standing on the edge of a quiet American town, shrouded in rumor and whispered warnings. They called it a hotel, though in truth it had stopped functioning like one long ago. The grand sign outside had letters missing, flickering when the wind howled at night, but everyone in town knew the name. It was spoken with hesitation, as though even the sound of the words could bring some hidden curse closer. And within that hotel, beyond its cracked windows and rotting carpets, there was one room whispered about more than any other. The most haunted room in America. People said that anyone who stayed a night there never came back quite the same. Some vanished completely, leaving behind half-packed suitcases and belongings untouched. Others were found in the room at dawn, staring blankly at the ceiling with expressions of terror frozen on their faces. A few survived long enough to leave, but they were never truly whole again. They muttered incoherently, screamed in their sleep, and in their final days begged never to hear the number of that room again. Still, despite the horror, something in me wanted to see it for myself. Curiosity, obsession, maybe even arrogance, I do not know what drove me, but I went. The journey was uneventful. A bus ride through long stretches of forest and countryside, the kind of terrain where cell signals vanish and the world feels older, untouched. By the time I stepped off onto the cracked pavement of the small town, evening shadows had already begun creeping across the sky. The hotel stood not far from the station, its massive silhouette cutting a dark shape against the dying light. From the outside, it looked almost abandoned. Paint peeled from the bricks, wooden frames sagged, and windows glowed faintly as though the light inside struggled to escape. I pushed the doors open, their hinges shrieking like something alive, and was met with a stale smell of damp wood and mildew. The lobby stretched wide, with chandeliers hanging above, most of their bulbs long dead. The carpet was worn thin, stained by time and footsteps that belonged to people who may never have left. At the desk sat a man, thin as a skeleton, his face pale beneath the dim yellow glow of the lamp beside him. His eyes met mine with an unreadable expression, not welcoming but not rejecting either. "You're here for a room?" he asked, his voice dry as though he had spoken too many warnings before and grown tired of repeating them. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one people talk about. The haunted one?" He said nothing at first, only stared. The silence stretched so long that I wondered if he would refuse me outright. Finally, he reached beneath the counter, retrieved an old brass key and slid it across to me. "I cannot stop you," he whispered. "But remember this, some doors should stay closed. Once you step in, it may never let you leave." I took the key, my hand brushing against the cold metal. For a moment I hesitated. His words were not the kind meant to scare tourists. They carried weight, as though he spoke from experience. But I ignored the tremor in my chest and made my way toward the grand staircase. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the wood soft from decades of neglect. The hallway stretched long, lined with portraits of stern-looking men and women whose painted eyes seemed to follow me as I passed. Dust coated every surface, disturbed only by faint footprints, though I could not tell if they were fresh or remnants from someone long gone. The room waited at the end of the corridor, its number engraved into the doorplate in tarnished brass. My fingers trembled slightly as I inserted the key. The lock turned with surprising ease, and the door creaked open slowly, as though reluctant to reveal what lay inside. The first impression was of stillness. The air hung heavy, colder than the rest of the building, carrying a faint metallic tang like old blood. The wallpaper was peeling, faded patterns barely visible. A single bed stood in the center, its sheets crisp but yellowed, as if freshly made yet untouched for decades. A cracked mirror leaned against one wall, reflecting my form in a warped, unsettling way. I stepped inside and shut the door. The sound echoed longer than it should have, as though the room swallowed it whole. For a moment, nothing happened. I told myself that the stories were exaggerations, products of fear. The room was nothing but old wood, plaster, and shadows. Yet even as I tried to steady my breathing, I noticed something strange. The silence wasn't complete. Beneath it, faint and irregular, there was a sound like soft breathing. Not mine. I turned sharply, scanning every corner, but the room was empty. The shadows clung thick around the edges, and the mirror seemed darker than the rest of the space, but nothing moved. Still, the faint rhythm of inhaling and exhaling persisted, so quiet I almost convinced myself it was in my head. Almost. Hours passed. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting, recording small details in my notebook as if that would help me remain grounded. The breathing never stopped, and sometimes it grew louder, as though something stood just behind me. I refused to look too often into the mirror, but each time my eyes betrayed me and glanced at it, I thought I saw something flicker just beyond my reflection. Not another figure exactly, but a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. The night stretched endlessly. My lamp flickered once, twice, before dimming to a dull glow. The air grew colder, biting at my skin even as I pulled my jacket tighter. Then came the first undeniable sign that I was not alone. The key I had left on the nightstand began to move. Slowly at first, as though nudged by a breeze, but the windows were shut, the air still. The metal scraped against the wood as it shifted toward the edge, then stopped. I stared, unable to blink, my breath caught in my throat. A moment later, the key slid off the surface and fell to the floor with a sharp clang. I jumped, heart pounding. My rational mind told me it could have been gravity, vibration, coincidence. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Something else was in the room, and then came the scratching. At first it was faint, a distant scrape along the walls, like nails dragging slowly across wood. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper, trying to pinpoint it, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Louder, sharper, circling the room as though something invisible paced just beyond sight. I pulled back, trembling, my body screaming to leave, but my mind was rooted in both terror and fascination. The scratching stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. And in that silence the breathing returned, this time closer. I turned toward the mirror, my pulse thundering in my ears. For the briefest second, I swore I saw movement behind my reflection. A shadow darker than the darkness itself, leaning closer. But when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself I could endure it, that I had to last until morning to prove the legends wrong. But in the back of my mind, a voice whispered a truth I did not want to accept. This was only the beginning. The first night passed in restless silence, broken only by whispers and unseen movements. By the time morning came, I felt as though I had not slept at all, but the pale light of day gave me strength. Sunlight streamed through the cracked curtains, and with it came a fragile illusion of safety. I convinced myself that the things I had heard and seen might have been tricks of the mind, shadows amplified by exhaustion. Still, a part of me knew it was no dream. The weight in the room had not lifted. Even as the sun climbed higher, the air remained unnaturally cold. The sense of being watched never left. I forced myself out into the town that day. The streets were empty, and the few people I passed gave me wary looks as if they could smell the place on me. I stopped at a small diner, the kind where the counters are chipped and the waitress has eyes heavy with stories she'll never tell. When I mentioned where I was staying, her face went pale. She told me not to return there, that others had tried and failed. I pressed for details, but she shook her head and simply whispered, "It doesn't let go." Back at the hotel, the lobby man eyed me as though surprised to see me alive. He asked nothing, but I could see the silent question in his gaze. "Why are you still here?" I wanted to ask him about the room, about what he knew, but something in his silence warned me off. I returned to the corridor, the long stretch lined with portraits. Their eyes followed me more intently this time. That night, dread settled into me more quickly than before. The moment I stepped into the room, the atmosphere thickened. It was heavier than the day before, as though the walls themselves knew I had chosen to come back. I set the lamp by the bed, lit a candle, and tried to steady myself. Yet almost immediately the disturbances began. The mirror caught my attention first. Its surface rippled faintly, as though a stone had been thrown into still water. I stared, frozen, as my reflection wavered and split. Behind me, within the glass, another outline appeared. A figure without form, darker than night itself, standing in the far corner of the room. I spun around, but the corner was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone, but the glass still trembled as though touched by invisible hands. The breathing returned. This time there was no mistaking it. It was loud, steady, and impossibly close, as though someone stood inches from my ear. My skin prickled with gooseflesh, and the candle flickered violently. I gripped the notebook I had carried and tried to write down what was happening, but the pen trembled in my hand. Each time I touched the paper, faint lines appeared that I had not written, words in a script I did not recognize, curling letters etched by an unseen force. I dropped the pen, my heart hammering. The notebook slid off the bed and fell open on the floor. The words spread across the page as if written in real time, letters scratching into existence one by one. "Leave now." My throat tightened. The sound of scratching returned, louder than before, racing along the walls like claws raking through wood. The ceiling groaned as though something crawled above, heavy and relentless. Dust rained down, coating my shoulders, but there was nothing visible. Suddenly, the door to the hallway slammed shut on its own. The key I had placed inside the lock turned slowly, deliberately, locking me in. The sound of metal grinding against metal was deafening in the silence that followed. I rushed to the handle, twisted it violently, but it would not move. The more I pulled, the colder the knob became, until frost gathered around its edges. My breath fogged in front of me, though the rest of the hotel had been warm. The whispering began next. Not one voice, but many. Male, female, child, old, all speaking at once, overlapping, incoherent. They came from the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from within the mirror itself. I pressed my hands over my ears but could not shut them out. Louder, faster, their voices built into a frantic chorus. Then suddenly they aligned into a single word that froze me where I stood. Stay! My vision blurred. The candle extinguished with a hiss, plunging the room into darkness. Only the faint glow of the lamp remained, flickering as though barely alive. In that half-light I saw movement. The shadow I had glimpsed before no longer stayed confined to the mirror. It stretched across the floor, crawling toward me though nothing cast it. Its shape writhed, twisting, as if many limbs were struggling to form into one body. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the bed frame. The mattress dipped slightly, as if someone unseen had sat down upon it. I leapt away, heart in my throat, but the impression remained, the sheets sagging beneath an invisible weight. The breathing grew louder, heavier, filling every corner of the room. I screamed for help, though I knew no one would hear me. My voice was swallowed whole by the walls, muffled into nothing. And then from the corner of the room, a sound emerged that chilled me to the marrow, laughter. Soft, low, and cruel. It came from everywhere at once, seeping from the cracks, the furniture, the very air. The lamp flared once, bright enough to blind me, then shattered. Darkness swallowed everything. The third night arrived with a heaviness that clung to every breath I took. By then, sleep had abandoned me entirely. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was wide awake, caught between dread and compulsion. I should have left. I knew it as clearly as I knew the shape of my own hands. Every warning, every whisper from strangers, every sign in that cursed room screamed at me to leave while I still could. Yet something stronger held me there, a pull that was not entirely my own. It felt as if invisible hands had gripped my shoulders, steering me back through the hallway and into the chamber that had already marked me as its own. The door closed behind me with a finality that rattled through my bones. There was no need to lock it this time. The room itself would not allow escape. The air pressed down with suffocating weight, colder and sharper than any winter. My lungs strained with each breath, and every exhale misted into pale clouds. The bed, the mirror, the faded wallpaper, all seemed darker than before, as though shadows bled into the surfaces. I lit a candle, though the flame shivered violently, as if unwilling to burn in such a place. I stood in the center, waiting, because I already knew the night would not allow me silence. It began almost instantly. A low groaning sound from the walls, stretching upward like the moan of something ancient. Then the mirror shuddered, not rippling like before, but shaking as if struck from the inside. Cracks snaked across its surface, and within the broken glass I saw not my reflection, but a dozen faces staring back. Pale, wide-eyed, mouths frozen in screams that made no sound. Their gazes locked onto me with such intensity that my knees nearly buckled. The whispering voices returned, louder now, clearer, no longer overlapping nonsense. They spoke in unison, dozens of mouths moving in the glass, chanting words that slithered into my mind. I could not understand the language, but I felt it, sharp and invasive, curling into the crevices of my thoughts. My ears rang, and for a moment I thought blood trickled from them, warm against the cold air. The bed groaned. The sheets rippled as though unseen hands dragged across them. Then, slowly, the shape of a body began to rise beneath the fabric. First the outline of legs, then a torso, then the dip of a head pressing upward. I stumbled back, heart hammering, as the blanket sagged under the weight of something invisible rising from it. The sheets fell away, revealing nothing but emptiness, yet the mattress remained pressed down as though someone still sat there. The candle extinguished without warning, plunging me into blackness. I fumbled for the matchbox, my fingers trembling, but before I could strike another flame, the laughter returned. It was not human laughter, though it carried human tones, distorted, layered, mocking. It echoed inside my skull, vibrating against bone until I thought my mind might splinter. I screamed into the dark, demanding to know what it wanted, begging for it to show itself. The air grew heavier, pressing against me until my chest ached. Then, in a voice that was not one but many, the answer came. You, the word echoed from everywhere at once, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, the very air. My skin burned cold. I dropped the matches, and in the faint light that bled from the cracks in the broken mirror, I saw movement. A shape gathered itself in the far corner, blacker than shadow, rising slowly to full height. It had no face, no form, just a shifting void that suggested limbs where there should be none. It moved toward me with a slow inevitability, each step accompanied by the sound of dragging chains that were not there. I tried to run, but my legs refused to obey. The air thickened like water, every movement slowed, every breath a struggle. My voice caught in my throat as I clawed toward the door, but the knob twisted on its own, the lock sliding shut with a metallic snap. I was trapped. The figure drew closer, its presence crushing, filling the room with a suffocating dread. As it neared, the faces in the mirror began to scream silently, their mouths stretching impossibly wide. The sound of their voiceless terror roared in my head until it drowned everything else. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I felt my body slipping, my consciousness pulling away, as if the shadow intended to hollow me out and wear me like a mask. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping, clawing at the boards. My fingers scraped splinters into my skin, but I hardly felt it. From beneath the floor came vibrations, like countless footsteps pacing, circling, waiting. The whispering rose into a crescendo, and then, abruptly, all sound ceased. Silence fell, heavier than the voices had been. In that silence, I heard something else. A voice, softer, fragile, cutting through the dark. It was a woman's voice, sorrowful, trembling. It whispered my name. My blood ran cold. I had never given my name aloud in this place, yet she knew it. I turned toward the mirror, and there she was. Among the broken shards, one reflection was not mine. A woman, gaunt and pale, dressed in tattered clothing from another era. Her eyes were wide, filled with despair. She raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass as though begging to be freed. Her lips moved, and I read the words, "Don't let it in." Before I could react, the shadow loomed over me, blotting out even the faint glow of the mirror. It reached forward, and though it had no hands, I felt its grip around my throat. Ice seeped into my skin, and my lungs convulsed as though drowning. My vision darkened at the edges, but the reflection of the woman screamed silently, shaking her head violently. I summoned what strength I could and clawed at the darkness, tearing at nothing, struggling against an enemy without substance. The pressure eased for a moment, but only because it had changed its method. My thoughts, my memories began slipping away, stolen by something invasive. I felt myself unraveling, my mind pulled into a void that stretched forever. Images of my past flashed before me, faces of people I loved, places I had been, then flickered out like candles extinguished one by one. And just as I thought I would vanish entirely, the mirror shattered. The sound rang like thunder, shards exploding outward in every direction. The reflection of the woman disappeared in the chaos, and the shadow recoiled, its form twisting violently. For the first time, I heard it shriek, a sound so unnatural that it scraped against the inside of my skull, making me convulse on the floor. The pressure on my chest released, the grip around my throat vanished, and I gasped for air as though surfacing from deep water. But the room was not safe. The walls groaned, cracks spreading as if the building itself would collapse. From those cracks seeped blackness, not shadows but liquid void, oozing across the floor. The shadow had not been banished, it was spreading, consuming. I scrambled to my feet, searching for escape, but the door remained sealed. The window rattled as though locked from the outside, the glass too thick to break. Panic surged through me. There was no way out. Then I noticed the floorboards beneath the bed had shifted. One plank was loose, jutting upward slightly. With shaking hands, I tore it free. Beneath lay a hollow compartment, and inside it, an old journal bound in cracked leather. I snatched it up, desperate, as the shadow writhed closer. The pages opened on their own, flipping rapidly until stopping on one marked with dried blood. The words written there seared into my mind. "It feeds on despair. Break the chain." The shadow lunged. I screamed, clutching the book, and the candle reignited on its own, flaring so bright it filled the room with blinding light. The figure recoiled, screeching as its form splintered into fragments of darkness. The voices shrieked in unison, filling my head until it felt like my skull would split. The light burned brighter still, and for a moment I saw not the hotel room but a place beyond, endless corridors lined with doors, each marked with numbers, stretching into infinity. Behind every door I heard muffled screams, sobs, whispers. A prison of souls, each trapped in their own chamber. Then the vision snapped away. The candle sputtered and dimmed, and the shadow was gone. But the room was not the same. The bed sagged as if rotted from within, the walls pulsed faintly like living flesh, and the mirror lay shattered in countless pieces. I stood trembling, the journal clutched in my hands, knowing this was far from over. The night had only just begun, and whatever had claimed this room was not finished with me yet. The silence after the storm was worse than the storm itself. I had believed that surviving the night inside that cursed room meant I had won, that whatever held me captive there had finally loosened its grip. But I was wrong. Survival was not victory. Survival was permission. The room had allowed me to live, but the mark it left behind would never fade. When I left the hotel at dawn, I felt lighter, yet something inside me whispered that I had not walked out alone. The town seemed brighter in daylight, as though the buildings and streets wanted to deny the darkness festering in their heart. People watched me with a strange mixture of fear and pity. No one asked me what had happened. No one needed to. They already knew. Every face told the same story. I was no longer merely a visitor passing through. I was now a carrier of the room's truth, bound to its secret. I tried to speak with them, desperate for answers. Most turned away before I could finish a sentence. A man outside the hardware store muttered under his breath, "It follows you now." An old woman at the corner refused to meet my eyes but clutched her cross tighter when I walked past. Even children, who should have known nothing of fear, fell silent and watched as though sensing something behind me. That night I did not return to the hotel. I found a small inn on the far edge of town, simple and plain, a place untouched by whatever curse ruled the other building. Yet even there, as I lay in bed, I could not rest. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls reminded me of that room. I told myself it was imagination, a residue of trauma. But when I closed my eyes, the dreams began. I saw the mirror again, but not where it belonged. It appeared in my dreams, free-floating in darkness, its surface rippling like water. Behind it, the shadow grew larger, more defined, no longer formless. I could almost see its face, though each time my mind tried to focus, the image shifted into something unspeakable. I would wake drenched in sweat, my ears ringing with the sound of whispers fading into silence. Days passed, yet the haunting followed me. Objects shifted on their own. My notebook, the one filled with words I had not written, reappeared beside me no matter where I left it. I tried throwing it away, burning it, even burying it in the woods beyond the town, but by the next morning it returned. Once I found it open on the nightstand, fresh lines written inside. "You belong to us now?" I decided I could not run from it. If escape was impossible, then understanding was my only chance. I returned to the town library, a building older than most in the area, its shelves heavy with forgotten histories. The librarian, a frail man with trembling hands, eyed me carefully when I asked about the hotel. For a long time he said nothing. Then, without a word, he disappeared into the back and returned with a single leather-bound book. He placed it before me and whispered, "Take it, but do not bring it back."